So I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Eden Gray. I'm a freshman here on campus and vice president of our Christian Union chapter. So just to kind of let you know how this event's going to work, he's going to present for about an hour, and then we're going to do a Q&A after for 30 minutes. Any questions you might have, you're welcome to write them down, think of them, and then at the end we'll go over it. So Professor James Torr is a professor of computer science and professor of materials science and nanoengineering at Rice University in Houston, Texas.
And chemistry.
And chemistry.
You forgot that.
Professor Torr has over 800 research publications, over 140 granted patents, and over 100 pending patents. His H-index is 178 with total citations of 150,000. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. His research group works in materials science, energy, medicine, electronics, and single-molecule nanomedicines and machines. He founded 14 companies based on his academic research, 3 of which are now public companies. In addition to this, he has an active social media presence at Dr. James Torr, spanning YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Rumble, Facebook, and X. And in 2024, on YouTube alone, there were 24 million views of his content for over 2 million viewed hours, which spans topics on science, faith, and the origin of life. For 10 years, Professor Torr led weekly Bible studies in the living units of maximum security prisons. He has been teaching a weekly Bible study to college students for the past 26 years, and he and his wife Shireen have served about 75 meals to students per week in their home for that entire time. They also distribute dozens of weekly meals to local cancer patients residing in church facilities and elderly shut-ins in Houston. The title of today's talk is a scientific challenge to the proposals on life's origin. Could the Bible be true? On behalf of Christian Union and all of us here tonight, I'd like to thank Dr. James Torr for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, there's a seat up here. There's another seat right there in the second row. And if you don't mind, I really don't mind at all. If you the floor is open here. If you don't mind sitting on the floor, rather than standing in the back, I really don't mind. Just come on and move up here, and you'll get a good view of the screen, and just help yourself. I'm actually quite used to this because when I speak in Asia, it's real common that students just come and sit up on the floors in the front. And at Rice University, sometimes they overbook classrooms, thinking that a lot of students don't come to class. So there's not often seats for them, so students sit on the ground, and so you're welcome to do that if you like. Okay, so the talk tonight is going to be somewhat bifurcated in that I'm going to talk about origin of life and the problems that I see with origin of life research, and basically it comes down to this, that I think we're clueless on life's origin. We just don't know where life came from. In a scientific sense, we don't know. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bible and the resurrection. Okay, so this is my family, and my wife is Shireen. She's sitting in the back there. I'm really glad she came today. There must not be a big basketball game going on with a team that you like, because usually she skips out on my lectures to watch some sporting event. But she showed up today, so you can go and say hi to her afterward. We've been married almost 43 years. We met, I think I was a junior in college when we met. And these are our children. Umbrina's our oldest. She graduated from Rice University, and she then did her master's degree in Israel. And then she stayed on as a mediator between Palestinians and Israelis for 10 years, and then went back to get her PhD. And so she and her husband, Philip, live there, and these are our 2 grandchildren. And then my next one is Sabrina. She's an attorney. And then the next one is Josiah. He's an urgent care physician on the Las Vegas Strip. And Ben did investment banking for a while, and now he's doing private equity in New York City. So that's my family, and so now you know something about me. This is just a collage of different areas that we've worked in, so you get a sense for the type of work that we do. I'm a synthetic organic chemist, but working across many different fields. And in the top left here, these three, this covers laser-induced graphene, where we found a technique in 2014 where you could hit anything made out of carbon with a laser. And it's not a fancy laser, it's the kind of laser that's found in every machine shop. It's just used for scribing and cutting. It's a 10.6 micron CO2 laser. And you can even buy them for a few $1,000s on eBay. And wherever the laser hits, it converts that carbon material into graphene. So it's not dropping graphene on the surface of bread, it's converting the carbohydrate strands into graphene. This area has really taken off. We just started a company around this, but and this is, by the way, this is a coconut that's turned into a supercapacitor. There's over 500 papers a year appear in the literature every year where people are using this technique. So it's really become like the preferred way to pattern graphene. This is where we've split open carbon nanotubes to become now nanoribbons. This is a material that's sold by Sigma Aldrich or Millipore Sigma. This is a silicon oxide-based memory. We developed this memory, and it's now commercialized, and it's in a company called Weebit, which is now a public company, and it's resistive random access memory, if you're familiar with the different types of computer memory. It's a two-terminal memory, and so you can really pack it together. We work in the area of traumatic brain injury and stroke. We've started a company around this. And then, this is traumatic brain injury and stroke. Traumatic brain injury is the #1 disabler of young adults. Stroke is the #1 disabler of older adults. And this is graphene, where we grew carbon nanotubes from them. And it's a very high surface area material. As soon as we developed that, we knew it'd be great for an electrode. And so we built a battery company around that. And so it's a battery company called Zeta Energy. It has about 60 or so employees. It's in Houston, and they just recently signed a big contract with a battery company that makes batteries for electric vehicles. This is graphene quantum dots. When we started in this area, graphene quantum dots were $1 million per kilogram. Then we learned how to make them from coal. Coal is $60 per ton in one-step conversion to graphene quantum dots. So think about those economics. And so that's in a company called DOTZ, D-O-T-Z. This is where we take plastic waste, which, as many of you know, is a big problem. And we take this plastic waste and we convert it into a material that can absorb CO2. So we try to take one problem and solve another problem with it. This is an area of where we make nano cars. This is a nano car that's 4 wheels, 4 independently rotating axles, and this is a motor. So when you shine a light on this molecule, it would spin unidirectionally, and I can't get the movie working here, but it will spin unidirectionally, and when it spins unidirectionally, it will start moving across the surface. And the motor spins at 3 million rotations per second unidirectionally. And now we've taken some of these motors and we've caused these to drill into lipid bilayers and kill cells. So we're killing cancer cells this way. This is a superbacterium. Superbacteria are slated to kill 10 million people a year by the year 2050. And so we really have to get a handle on how to kill these. And these drill right through in the case of a superbacterium, it's a cell wall, not even a cell membrane, able to drill right through. This is in a whole area of environmental chemistry that we do. It spun off of this, where we started making graphene, this amazing material, but rather than patterning it like we did in the upper left, we can just take bulk material and turn it into graphene. So we can take coal, for example, put a high voltage and a high current through it, and it will decompose this material and in about 100 milliseconds convert it into graphene. And so all the bonds break, and then the carbon reconstructs as a thermodynamically most stable system, which is graphene. And so this is now in a company called Universal Matter, and in their pilot facility, they're making 1 ton per day of graphene. It's going to concrete, asphalt, lubricants, plastics, and rubber tires. It's in every Ford motor vehicle. It's in the foam cushion seats, and it's in the underhood insulation. This is a mountain of coal fly ash. It's the inorganic residue that's left over after you burn coal. It's a toxic waste, and we can flash that and get the valuable metals back out of that. Same thing with red mud, which is also called bauxite residue. It's left over after making aluminum, so we can get the precious materials out of that, get the iron out. It's red because there's hematite iron in there, and then you can take that and get the remaining aluminum out. These are printed circuit boards. Every time you save something to the cloud, it's stored on a printed circuit board somewhere in a server farm, and those printed circuit boards are replaced every 3 years. And what do you do with those mountains of printed circuit boards? Well, they're toxic waste, so we grind them up, flash them, and we get the metals back out, because metals are essentially can be infinitely recyclable. And so rather than going all over the world and mining all the time, can we just get the metals out of our waste? We do the same thing with batteries, and we also are flashing soil to destroy the organics, the toxic organics in soil. So that's an overview of the kind of work we do. Now with that, I'm going to go into some definitions on abiogenesis. So abiogenesis is the origin of life from non-living matter. To construct any convincing theory of abiogenesis, we must take into account the conditions of the Earth about 4 billion years ago. So this is not evolution. This is before evolution. Evolution is taking a simpler organism and moving it into another organism, generally of higher complexity, if you're talking about a macroevolution. This is not that. This is pre-evolution. This is the first generation of life. Where did the first cell come from? Prebiotically relevant means that we're restricted to materials and procedures and conditions that might have been available on an early Earth. So it's not what can we do in a modern laboratory, even though in modern laboratories nobody's ever made life, but what could have happened on an early Earth when you didn't have human-made reagents around there and human-made tools and analytical instruments. So nobody was present at life's origin, so we'll never know how life originated scientifically. But that's not what we're seeking to answer. What we're seeking is an experimentally verifiable hypothesis as to how life might have arisen. So what's the characteristics of life? So this is not the definition of life. The definition of life science does not give us. That's something that is better answered through a religious text like the Bible. But the characteristics of life science can tell us a lot about. Its responsiveness to the environment, its growth and change, ability to reproduce. You have a metabolism and breathe, maintain homeostasis, and being made of cells and passing on traits to offspring. That's not my definition, that's textbook definition. Homeostasis is the steady internal physical condition. So that's what we are up against. If you want to say how did life form, that's what we have to be able to talk about. I'm not here to talk about God of the gaps. God of the gaps says that if we don't have an answer to something, therefore God. And scientifically, that would be a very hard thing to do, because many times we then find answers in science, how things happen. So prior to the mid-1950s, 1952 or 53, the discovery of the DNA helix and how information is stored in the coding of proteins from that, we didn't know. Why is it that if two parents are tall, their child is usually tall? We had no answer for that. But now we know why that is. And because there's information stored in the DNA, and this is passed on to the cells beyond them. So if we had said we don't know, therefore it's God, that would have been like magic or something. No, there's many things we don't know. So even this thing of origin of life, we don't know. We have no idea. And I hope I can convince you today we're nowhere close to being able to solve this. But that doesn't mean that it's unsolvable. I presume one day we'll find an answer to that scientifically, to that. If you had asked a person in, say, 1600, will we ever be able to send people to the moon and bring them back again? They'd be like, you're crazy. We can't even fly, let alone do space flight. I mean, you can't do it. And now several hundred years later, you can do that sort of thing. So we don't know what humans will develop over the next several hundred years. All right, molecules are the language of living systems. This is what we are made out of. We're not made out of silicon and wires and plastics. And you have to be able to have four classes of building blocks, I call them. You have to have the sugars, which are also called carbohydrates, the amino acids, which end up as being these often called the peptides or the polypeptides, which make up most of our enzymes and all of our proteins. Nucleotides, this is where you have a sugar, you have a phosphate group, and you have some nucleobase there, and this is what makes up our DNA and our RNA. And then you have to have glycerol from which the lipids are made. Now, everywhere that you see a red arrow, that's a stereogenic center, sometimes called a chiral center, meaning that it has handedness. And everything we find in nature, it has one particular handedness and not the other. It's hard to make things like that. We have techniques in the laboratory on how to do that, but we have no idea how that happened in natural systems. And with these nucleotides, you have these four stereocenters. You always have a stereocenter in 19 of your 20 canonical amino acids. In sugars, you'll have multiples of these. These are not stereocenters, but these are enantiotopic, meaning that at some point they're going to have to be distinguished one from the other, and that you do with a chiral reagent and in order to make the lipids. Now, the polymers of these, this is another problem. How do you go from these to the polymers? We don't know how that was done in a prebiotically relevant fashion, which I'll tell you about. All right, so molecules don't care about life, never have, never will. They don't have a brain. They don't know to move toward life. This whole idea of molecular evolution is silly because molecules never have moved toward life ever, unless they've had an organism working on them. An organism might be a cell, an organism might be a human being. Human beings can push them toward life, but we don't know how to get them to start living. But they never move toward life. In fact, they generally move away from life. They have no propensity, they have no brain, they don't know to move toward life. What's the state of origin of life research? Well, nobody has shown a method to make the enantiopure versions, that means the handedly pure versions, of carbohydrates, amino acids, nucleotides, or lipids, the four classes of molecules that you need. We are made up of these four classes of molecules. That's what we're made out of. It's really remarkable. Not just us, but every cell in our body and every bacterium, every cell is made up of these four classes of molecules. And we don't know how to make the enantiopure versions of these in any prebiotically relevant manner. If we are able to make even the racemic, meaning the mixed, both the right-handed and the left-handed version of these, those are useless mixtures. They are not usable for anything. And generally they come with many other things around them. So if you're a chemist, how many people in here are synthetic organic chemists? One. What's your name? Hal. And are you a postdoc or a professor? Postdoc. And you do synthetic organic chemistry? Yeah, with chirality. Okay. You are my man. All right? If I say something that is not true, chemistry-wise, I want you to stand up. All right? And you look like a gentleman, so you probably wouldn't shout out liar. But just say, excuse me, okay? Because you need to check me. You're the only one in here that can really check me on this, all right? And then at the end, if I forget, raise your hand, because I want to ask you your opinion on what I've said, because that's important to me. Because you're the community that can really understand me in this, all right? And the others in here have to take it on faith, but you're going to be the checker on this, all right? And let me know how many Pinocchios at the end, okay? All right, so we don't know how to do these, and usually what happens is if you have a mixture of different compounds, it's very hard to do chemistry. Very hard to do chemistry because if you have a hydroxyl group hanging off of a nucleotide, it doesn't know to distinguish that from a hydroxyl group hanging off a free sugar. It doesn't know how to do that. And if you had a hydroxyl group hanging off an amino acid, it wouldn't know how to distinguish those. They look the same to typical reagents. The only reagents that know how to distinguish those are biological reagents like enzymes. And that's why you can take a handful of supplements and take them all at once, and your body knows what to do with each one of those. You can't do chemistry like that. Before biology, when you're just doing regular, you can't do chemistry that way. It doesn't know how to distinguish these. These mixtures are a real problem. So nobody's ever solved that. Nobody's ever shown that life could form with lower enantiomeric excess mixtures, thereby mitigating the need for chiral-induced spin selectivity. Chiral-induced spin selectivity is a relatively new phenomenon, only about 25 years old. So when I was in school, we didn't learn about this. We learned about enzymes. How many of you here are biology majors? Or have taken, yeah, okay. So you know about enzymes. Now enzymes, the way you're taught about enzymes is that you're taught that these are like a handed molecule, and just like a right hand can only go in a right-handed glove and a left hand in a left-handed glove, and these are distinguished by shapes. They fit, this lock and key sort of arrangement. That's only half of the story. The other half of the story as to why biology is as pure as it is that there's this phenomenon called chiral-induced spin selectivity, where each chiral environment acts as a spin valve. So electrons can be either spin up or spin down. And what biology does, what these chiral environments do, is they only allow one electron spin through it and not the other. So these are spin valves. They control which spin of electron comes through this. And that's very important, it turns out, because if the wrong spin comes through, it deflects a lot, and you get a lot of backscattering, and that generates heat. And that's why my computer is very hot, whereas our brains only put out 2 to 10 watts, something like that. A very small amount of heat generated by our brains with all the thinking we might do. And why is that? Because of chiral-induced spin selectivity keeps these from burning up, keeps cells from burning up. And so you had to have had chirality at the start of life. It's not something that we could have evolved into. Chirality had to have been there at the start. You had to have enantiopure versions at the start. You couldn't have evolved into that. Say, well, biology probably started with racemic mixtures and then it optimized from there. It could not have. Nobody solved this problem. Nobody has shown that the mixtures found in meteorites or interstellar space could be useful for synthesis. People will say, hey, we found a sugar in a meteorite, or we found an amino acid in a meteorite. Now, you can get these things that form from these explosive type events that might come here, but they're always in vast mixtures. You can find these, but they're always in vast mixtures. Now, we have analytical tools called mass spectrometry, that you can inject a sample, and you can even see individual molecules here. And so we have these analytical tools that can detect them. But there's not enough there to be useful at all. There's not enough there to be useful. And also they're in such gross mixtures, you could never use them. So the mixtures are too complex. So even if you find one or two, they're generally not biologically relevant, because if you find more than one, generally they're racemic mixtures, and if they're not racemic mixtures, they have very low enantiomeric excess. There's very few exceptions to that. Those few exceptions are for molecules that aren't biologically relevant anyway. And so nobody has been able to take the mixtures that are found in interstellar space and use them for anything useful. Nobody solved the mass transfer problem. So what do you do in chemical synthesis? Your name was Ho? How? All right. So what happens, How, when you're doing a synthesis and you run out of starting material? What do? You make more, right? Yeah. You're going through a multi-step synthesis and you repeat. Well, how do you go back and repeat? You look at your notebook. You say, okay, how did I make this before? Let me do it again. So in nature, say something is going along and it's approaching a molecule useful for life. And now it's run out of starting material. But it took 400 million years to get there, say. Now what do? Well, nature can go back and make some more, just like How does this. But no, it can't do that because nature never kept a laboratory notebook. Nature doesn't know how to go back, or why to go back, Or should it go back? Because it doesn't know what it's working toward. It's not working toward life, just randomly. And it can't make any more. How much would you need? How many grams of carbohydrates would you need? How many grams of amino acids, the different amino acids? How many grams of nucleotides would you need? How many grams of glycerol would you need to go through the thousands of steps that it would take to make a cell? You'd probably need many hundreds of tons. That's a mass transfer problem because you keep running out. And that's if you had a brain going towards something. Here you don't have a brain. It's the mass transfer problem. It just kills you. It wipes you out. One of the most difficult things in synthesis is you run out of material. Say you had a 70% yield over 10 steps. That's 0.7 times 0.7 times 0.7, 10 times. You get very little at the end of that. And 70% is pretty good. Most of the time you run the reaction the first time, it doesn't work, and you have to optimize to get it up to 10%, and then hopefully you can optimize it and get it much higher than that. Or you take a big hit, because as you're going along, you're not multiplying times 0.7, you're multiplying times 0.1 if you only had a 10% yield at that step. It's a big problem in synthesis, mass transfer problem. Do you know what origin of life experts do with this problem? You know what they say about this? Nothing. And no answer is an answer in itself because they won't address it. The amino acid polymerization problem. How do you polymerize amino acids to make a polypeptide, to make all your proteins? Nobody knows how these things can happen because the free energies are positive, meaning the reactions don't want to go. And so you have to put clever activating groups on there. And the other thing is half of the amino acids, every one in a red circle, have active side chains. So these active side chains compete in the reactions. So you're just hooking these together, but they have an added group coming off, and those added groups getting in the way, and they couple. As soon as you have one of those added groups get in there, it's game over. That whole polypeptide is done. It's toast after that. Nobody knows how to deal with these side groups hanging off. Well, how do chemists deal with this? We protect the side groups. And we have a different protection side group for all of these to protect them so that we can selectively deprotect them when we have to. That's all developed by human beings. On an early Earth, you never had that. And these are all using human-made reagents, combinations that don't exist in nature. Like a car doesn't exist in nature. Chemists have made a lot of things that don't exist in nature to help them do synthesis. These weren't around on an early Earth. Nobody knows how to solve that problem. So what I do is I say, okay, don't even make a polypeptide, just took 2 units together for me. And so I took 10 of the top people in the origin of life arena, and I challenged them on YouTube to just put 2 amino acids together using a prebiotically relevant chemistry without getting competition from these side groups. And I told them, if you do that, I will stop bothering you guys. I will stop talking about origin of life. I'll take down everything on my YouTube channel on origin of life if you just solve this one problem. Guess what? They never even tried. They looked at it and they knew they couldn't do it, and they never even addressed it. You can't even make a dipeptide. You can't even hook 2 amino acids together. And we have gazillions of them that make up a cell. You can't even put 2 together. It's a big problem. Nobody's ever solved this problem. There is the nucleotide problem. So you see that in this RNA, this 5' position couples through to the 3', 5', 3', 5'. That's how it's coupled. Now what happens if it doesn't go to the 3', it goes over to this one, that would be the 2' position, and that's a problem, because that's not the way it should be hooked together. So if you do this in a prebiotically relevant coupling, you always get a lot of these 2' position couplings. And you get a lot of branching. Every time you get that, it's game over. You don't know how to make them. Even if you had a nucleotide, you don't know how to couple them together. The polymerization problem is against you. The free energy is against you, both in the polypeptides, free energy is against you in the polynucleotides, and the coupling. Again, the regiochemistry problem. And then, so I said, just make a 200 mer of these. If anybody can do that, I take down all my material. You don't even have to do it. Just show me a way how it could be done. And I won't grade your papers. That's what I told them. I said, you can all grade it yourselves. So I allow the students to take the exam, open book, open note, 60 days, and you can grade your own paper. Tell me that you solved this. Nobody would address it. And people were worried. They were worried that somebody would solve this and I'd have to take down all the content from my YouTube channel and never talk about it again. And I told them, fear not. I'm an organic chemist. I know how to write an exam that cannot be solved. It's just no problem. No problem. Nobody solved the carbohydrate problem. Carbohydrates are the most difficult class of compounds. If you have 6 nucleobases in DNA, what's the ways you can arrange these? Just one, AAA, for example. If you have 6 glucose molecules, what's the ways that you can hook these together? Over 1 trillion ways to hook together these 6 glucose molecules. All the glucose molecules are the same because they have 5 hydroxyl groups. This hydroxyl groups can be alpha, as it is shown here, or beta going up. It equilibrates back and forth at that anomeric center. They can reside as the 6-membered ring, the 5-membered ring, or the open form. So you take all of those different combinations and all of those, you get to over 1 trillion structures. 1 trillion is a very big number. People outside the sciences don't even realize how big a trillion is. People think, oh, the national deficit, million, billion, trillion, what's the difference? Let me tell you the difference with something that you will feel. 1 million seconds is 11 days. So say you ask somebody, will you marry me? And they say, wait 1 million seconds. Okay, I'm cool. I can wait 1 million seconds. What if they said wait 1 billion seconds? That's 32 years. I mean, that's asking a lot. All right? What if they said wait 1 trillion seconds? That's 32,000 years. We can no longer feel that. We feel the difference between 11 days and 32 years. So this is over 1 trillion different structures from these 6 units. There's more information that can be stored in a carbohydrate than can be stored in DNA by far, by far. Every one of these polymerized systems is an information storage system. Every one of them stores information. And not all the coding that's in a carbohydrate comes from that original DNA of the cell. Sometimes you have exogenous DNA from another cell restructuring the carbohydrates that are on the surface of a neighboring cell, and now you have exogenous information coming in there. Every one of these is massive storage information systems. It's really amazing. Nobody's ever solved that problem. And so I said, instead of just hooking together a bunch of carbohydrates, which is what's in our body, just hook together 2. Just make a disaccharide, 2, with this coupling. If you can do that, you take 2 glucose molecules and make just that isomer. Can you do that in a prebiotically relevant manner? That was another one they couldn't solve. Couldn't solve it. These are the most fundamental, basic questions you'd need to address origin of life. Couldn't be solved. What about the stability of a polymeric chain? So what you do, normally we speak in chemistry of half-life. You have, say, a mole of molecules, and after what amount of time would only half of those now exist? In other words, half of them decompose. That talks then about half-life. When you talk about one molecule, because the chances of making a coded molecule that codes for something useful is very low, and we'll look at some of those numbers in a minute, but people will say, well, what if one happened? It just happened. There was enough time and this happened. Well, what happens is that if you had that one, how long would that RNA molecule last? Because the biggest theory out there is something called the RNA world hypothesis. So what you do is you look at the half-life of RNA, and if you keep it really pure in a laboratory without any divalent ions, you'd have a half-life of, say, 100 days. That's 2,400 hours. And if you had a 600-mer, that'd be 2,400, but divided by 600 is 4 hours. So if somewhere an RNA molecule formed, it would have to find all the reagents, all the 20 canonical amino acids for it to work, with the associated enzymes around, and it would only have 4 hours, and it would be decomposed. Time is the #1 enemy of forming life. People think, oh, given enough time, you had billions of years, the Earth is 4 billion years old, and you don't have 4 billion years because you have to go from the time when the Earth cooled after the late heavy bombardment, and even then, we live in an aqueous system, these things don't last. It's the end. So you only have about 4 hours to do this. And so time is really an enemy here. All right, what about the Leventhal 1.0 paradox? And that's, how do proteins fold? For proteins to be active, they have to fold. Now, some proteins can fold, they don't need foldamers. They don't need, but many proteins need association to fold on them. So these authors, for example, say, again, none of these are well, this isn't my calculation. This is another person's calculation. They said if you just had 100 residues, 100 amino acids in a chain, which would be a small polypeptide, a small protein, how long would it take that to fold without having assistance by other enzymes? So on an early Earth, if some chain. And he says you had 10 to the 95 possible conformations, meaning that even a small protein that initiated folding by random search at the time of the Big Bang would still be thrashing about today. And that's going back 14 billion years at the time of the Big Bang. So we don't know how these things fold, but that's a small problem compared to Leventhal 2.0, and that's the interactome problem. It's the non-covalent interactions that occur between molecules in a cell, and these things are ordered non-covalently. How did they get ordered? Well, if you just look at the protein, just protein-protein, not protein DNA, not DNA RNA, just protein-protein interactions in a simple yeast cell, you get 10 to the 79 billion combinations. That's a 1 with 79 billion zeros after it. Is that a big number? Well, the number of elemental particles in the universe is 10 to the 90. Well, what do you mean by elemental particles? Do you mean atoms? Or do you mean electrons, neutrons, and protons? It doesn't matter anymore. The difference between between an atom and the number of subatomic particles that make it up may be a difference of only 100. So when we're talking numbers 10 to the 90th, a factor of 100 doesn't matter anymore. That's the kind. Now, this is 10 to the 79 billion. This is a crazy big number. There's not enough time in a million universes to do this. Just the ordering of the molecules in a single cell. So what happens in a cell? These molecules are already ordered. And so what happens is the cell necks down and divides into 2 cells where it distributes the information to both halves and necks down and distributes this. And so now you have it in both of these daughter cells. And those do it again and again and again. So you have to work your way back to Luca, the first cell. The first cell and the last universal common ancestor, Luca. Where did that information come from? And nobody knows. The interactome, it's not just the code, the information we don't know, but the requisite interactome, the ordering of that. These are insurmountable barriers. We just don't know. Nobody solved the code problem. Remember, it's not just random nucleobases that form this. You have to have the whole code. Nobody has ever solved the code problem. Big problem. Now, these are all the different systems that you would have to have if you were going to have something that could, a cell that could function. Nobody's ever made any of these. So what's needed to make a simple cell? Nobody knows how to make these molecules here at the bottom, so I'll give you all of that. I'll provide that. Nobody knows how to polymerize these. I showed you the polymerization problem. You couldn't even make a dipeptide or disaccharide. So I'll give you all of these. I'll give you the polymers. And once I give you the polymers, I give you all of the informational code. If I gave you all of that in your laboratory, could you put a cell together? Nobody can. Nobody would dare even say that, because we can take a cell and deconstruct a cell and have all the individual components, and you put those all in individual bottles in your laboratory. Go ahead, just put the cell together again. Go ahead, do it. Nobody can do it. Nobody even knows how to begin to do that. Remember the interactome problem? How do you get these things all ordered? Nobody knows how to do this. So how are you going to do this under a rock or in a hydrothermal vent or in some pool somewhere? How are you going to do this on an early Earth? That's how clueless we are. So there's lots more challenges. You'd have to remove all human intervention. How do you do synthesis on impure mixtures or solve separation problems? The relay synthesis problem. You're not starting way down here. You're starting at very simple compounds: methane, CO2, cyanide. Very simple compounds. How do you solve the condensation polymerization? All of these have a free energy that's positive, so they don't normally want to go. And any condensation polymerization has to have really pure materials. And then the resurrection of a cell. Can you even take a dead cell? And I put this before. Can you take a dead cell and bring it back to life? In fact, if you had a dead cell, What is it you just lost when that cell just died? We can't even define what it is we just lost. I mean, there's something in life we can't even define what it is that was just lost. Was it just the ionic potentials? What is it that was just lost? So that you can bring a dead cell back to life. Nobody's ever done that. So has science explained the origin of life? Not even close. Science might explain it someday, but that day is far from today. How do I know it's far from today? Because we're getting further away from the solution. It's not because the cell is evolving. It's because every year we learn more about the complexity of a cell. We didn't know about chiral-induced spin selectivity, that we had to solve that thing. We didn't know about the interactome, we had to solve that thing. So the goalposts are moving. Every time we think we're getting closer to solving this, we might move a nanometer closer and the cell has moved 20 miles away. I gotta solve that too. And so you can track if you're moving toward a solution of something by looking at how much closer you are to the target. And here we get further away from the target every year. So when you see articles like this that just came out last week, March 29, 2025, how did the first cells form on Earth? Scientists think they finally figured it out. Oh, come on. This is what I'm talking about. This is just not true. It's just not true. Every year you come out with another article like this. It's like fusion. I mean, it's just you know, and at least fusion, we're probably getting closer. Here we're getting further away. But you see articles like this, and this is why we've taken surveys. 2/3 of the general public believe that scientists have made life in the laboratory. 2/3. And we're nowhere close. But it's because of articles like this. And the origin of the problem of these articles is the researchers themselves. It's not this poor Eric Rawls, the staff writer. It's the researchers themselves, because they are the ones who speak to the writers. All right, let's look at another facet of life. The things of life that aren't molecule-based, the things of life that consume us as individuals. And this is where the book of Nature, our science book, doesn't really tell us a whole lot. What's another facet of life? You know, in the Bible it says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. There's two parts here. There's a confession with the mouth and believing in your heart that Jesus raised from the dead. Now, I ask you, how can any thinking man or woman who has an education believe that somebody has risen from the dead? Because none of us has a data point on that. None of us. This is not an NDE, a near-death experience where a person is flatlined for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes and they're being resuscitated. And then they come back and all of a sudden they say, you know, I was going through a tunnel, I saw this great light, and that's a near-death experience. This is not that. This is in a grave over a 3 days period. This is in a grave over 3 days. How does somebody come back to life after 3 days? If these guys were just trying to make up some new religion, they never would have made this as a barrier, because they say you have to believe this in your heart in order to be saved. That means be with God forever. They would have chosen something much easier. You have to believe Jesus loved children. You have to believe Jesus loved puppies. I mean, something easy. Not this hard. Just like crazy hard. Let me give you some analysis, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you evidence for the resurrection. I'm going to give you historical evidence for the resurrection. I'm going to first give you historical evidence from the Bible, but people tend to not believe that the Bible has anything that is worth capitalizing upon when you're trying to give evidence. So I need to give you something about the veracity of the Bible, and then I'm going to give you extra biblical evidence for the resurrection, things outside of the Bible. What do most academic religious scholars agree upon? So we're not talking about Christians. If you go into an academic institution and speak with the professors there, what do most of them agree upon? And they're coming from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some will be Christians, some will come from Buddhist backgrounds, whatever it is. And what do they agree upon? They agree upon this, that Jesus died by crucifixion. There was a man named Jesus that died by crucifixion. Some even suggest that this is the most solid fact of that period of history because there's so much written about it. There's so much reporting about it, not just in written texts, but also in mosaics, also in coinage, things that were found, that they'll agree that this is the case. Number two, the disciples of Jesus, this is what religious scholars would agree, that the disciples of Jesus asserted that Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. Many of those disciples died for that assertion. That's what they would agree upon. All right, they're not saying that Jesus rose from the dead. They're saying his disciples believed this and they died for that. Number three, certain unbelievers, such as Jesus' brother James, and even enemies of Jesus, such as Paul, asserted that Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. They too died for that assertion. So that's what they'd agree upon. There's another historian named Will Durant. And Will Durant wrote something called The History of Civilization, the story of civilization, and it's 8 volumes. It's huge. It's like it's like that much. It's really big. And volume number 3 is called Caesar and Christ. And of himself, if you think he's a Christian, he's not. He said of himself he's an agnostic with pantheistic overtones, but he's an expert historian. Now, expert historians, how many historians are in here? Okay, just one? Good. All right. So historians are amazing people because they are trained to discern if something is a truthful writing or not. So, for example, if there were a car accident in the middle of an intersection and you interviewed 4 people on 4 different corners of that intersection, the essence of the story would be similar. There was an accident on that intersection. The details would be different, because they all had different perspectives. And if the details are all the same, you know there's been collusion. That couldn't be a true story. And if things corroborate too well, there's been collusion. The example that I can give is I was giving an exam one night, an organic chemistry exam, and some students had to travel with a professor to some event. And so I gave 2 copies of the exam to the professor, and he was going to administer them that evening, the same evening as the class was taking it, during their class trip. And he gave them each the exam, and they were to go to their respective rooms and take the exam. And then they gave it back to him, and then those came back to me. And rather than giving them to the grader, I thought, okay, I can grade 2 exams. So I went through and I graded the one exam. Then I graded the other exam, and I thought, these 2 exams look the same. You know, for organic chemistry, there's one right answer, and there's like a million wrong answers. And so when all the wrong answers are the same, there's a problem. Not only that, when all the molecules were drawn on the 2 exams at exactly the same angle, this just doesn't happen. I mean, molecules rotate in space, so there was collusion based on that. So this is what historians will look at. But anyway, commenting on the Gospels, he writes, the contradictions of minutiae, not substance. In essentials, the synoptic Gospels agree remarkably well and form a consistent portrait of Christ. So people who say, oh, the Gospels are full of contradictions, I say, show me 3. They say it's full of them. I say, okay, show me 3. They've never done that. Students now will pick up their cell phone and they'll ask, ChatGPT, show me contradiction, because they can't find them. He says those are not contradictions. That's minutia. That's what you expect from different people telling the same story. That's not contradictions. In the enthusiasm of its discoveries, the higher criticism is applied to the New Testament tests of authenticity so severe that by them 100 ancient worthies, for example, Hammurabi, David, Socrates, would fade into legend. About 250 years ago, higher criticisms started coming in where they started saying, this couldn't be true about the New Testament, this couldn't be true, this couldn't be true. And it made the New Testament a much stronger document because they would dig where the New Testament said had been a city, and they find the city. They dig where the New Testament said there was a public bath, and they would find that public bath. They would find coins that underscore exactly the time periods where you find the inscription of Pilate on the coin, right from the time period that these things were happening. It's made the Bible a much stronger document, the criticisms did. And now, in fact, high criticism is being applied to other religions, and those other religions are cratering under this. And he says, if you had applied this to any other of these ancient documents, they would have collapsed. He said, despite the prejudices and theological preconceptions of the evangelists, that is, the apostles, they record many incidents that mere inventors would have concealed. The competition of the apostles for high places in the kingdom, their flight after Jesus' arrest, Peter's denial, the failure of Christ to work miracles in Galilee, the references of some auditors to his possible insanity, his early uncertainty as to his mission, his confessions of ignorance as to the future, his moments of bitterness, his despairing cry on the cross. No one reading these scenes can doubt the reality of the figure behind them. People write themselves always into a good light. Always, always. Here, they didn't always write themselves into a good light. They even record things where Jesus, gives a despairing cry on the cross. He says, people don't make up stuff like that. That a few simple men should in one generation have invented so powerful and appealing a personality, so lofty an ethic, and so inspiring a vision of human brotherhood would be a miracle far more incredible than any recorded in the gospel. The gospels are full of many miracles. The raising of the dead, the healing of the blind, the restoration of hearing to the deaf. He says, that's not as miraculous as trying to tell me that a few simple men could have come up with this story of the gospel. That's to a trained historian, one of the best historians of the 20th century, Will Durant. After 2 centuries of higher criticism, the outlines of the life, character, and teaching of Christ remain reasonably clear and constitute the most fascinating feature of the history of Western man. So what's the evidence? So the biblical evidence for the resurrection. Jesus rose, so as I've established for you, the credibility of the gospel accounts. It says Jesus rose early in the morning. The sun was already up. He was seen by Mary, and then he was seen by another group of women. The first people to see him were women. Women had no legal basis for an argument in that day. They couldn't appear in a court. Their testimony meant nothing in that day, either in Israel or in Rome. Why would the Bible report that Jesus appeared first to women? Because that's the way it happened. That's why. And it was reported that way. And he told them, go tell my disciples. Some of the women ran, Mary and some of the other women ran to report it to the disciples. The disciples were not trying to psych themselves up to believe this because it says they did not believe the women. They did not believe them. But Peter and John ran to the tomb nonetheless. They get to the tomb, the Roman guard is gone. The stone is rolled away, the stone that the women couldn't have moved on their own. The seal that Pilate had put there was broken. They go into the tomb and it shocked them. They saw the grave clothes still there. If somebody had stolen the body, the grave clothes wouldn't be there. They would have taken the whole thing. And then it says it was rolled up by itself. What they would do is they would put a sheet over the body and then they'd roll these strips around the body. You still have this roll. How do you roll it up? How do you roll it up? There's no template. If you had taken it all off, you just would grab the body and go. You wouldn't take the time to unravel this thing. And if you unraveled it, how do you roll it back up as if you don't have the template of the body to roll it back up around? I mean, there was something here that shocked them, so much so that it says John left there believing. He never saw Jesus, and he believed, just based on the women's testimony and the conditions of the empty tomb. It says Peter was shocked. He was really bewildered about this. A few days later, Jesus appears to them. Why was it a few days? Because he had told them, the angels had told them, Jesus had told them, meet me in Galilee. When I rise from the dead, meet me in Galilee. They never went. Jesus is up there in Galilee looking at his watch. Where is everybody? Nobody's there. So finally, he goes down to Jerusalem and he appears to them in the upper room. And it says they thought they were seeing a ghost. That's what they thought. They thought they were seeing a ghost. And he says, no, guys, come here. He commanded them to touch him. He says, touch me. See, I have flesh and bones. He commanded them to do this. Then he says, have you something here to eat? And the Bible is very specific. He says they gave him a piece of broiled fish and he ate it. Broiled fish. He demonstrated to them he was a physical being. Then he disappeared from their midst. Thomas had not been there at the time. Thomas comes back. They said, hey, Thomas, we've seen the risen Savior. Thomas says, I don't believe it. You must be an imposter. You know, tall, thin guy, beard, long hair. They kind of all look the same. You know, you guys are fooled. And he says, I won't believe it unless I stick my finger into the holes in his hands and unless I stick my hand into the hole in his side. When Jesus was on the cross, many hours after he had died, a Roman soldier thrust his spear into Jesus' side and opened up a huge wound, and it says blood and water gushed out. Why blood and water? Because the blood had already coagulated. You get a gelatinous phase of thick red, and you get an aqueous phase of just slightly pink. There's no way Jesus could have been alive at that point. All right? Blood had already coagulated. That's what the Bible reports having come out. It was into that hole that Thomas is going to have to stick his hand. Jesus appears again to them. First thing he does, Thomas, come here. Stick your finger into the holes in my hands. And now stick your hand into the hole in my side. And be not unbelieving, but believing. Thomas has to insert his hand into the hole in Jesus' side. He was commanded by the Savior to do it. Who could resist the risen Savior's command? Jesus wasn't buckled over in pain. He was risen from the dead. He had a hand even inside him. Jesus appeared to them in the upper room, indoors. He appeared to them out of doors. He appeared to them on the road between Jerusalem and Emmaus. He appeared to them again in Emmaus, inside. This is a 3-hour walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus. He had joined them somewhere on that journey. He walked with them to the Mount of Olives. He appeared to them up at the Sea of Galilee in the north. He stood on the shore, and he directed them where to throw their nets to catch a large amount of fish. He cooked breakfast for them on the shore, a fish breakfast for them. He cooked it himself. He demonstrated that he had risen from the dead. He walked on the earth 40 days after his resurrection. Paul is reporting in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 all the people that saw Jesus, and he lists all the men, none of the women, because he was building a legal argument at that time. He lists over 500 people. He says over 500 people saw him at one time. People can hallucinate, but you never have mass hallucinations seeing the same thing. 500 people saw him at one time, and he says most of them are alive still today. You can go and ask them. These are biblical reports. The Bible reports how James, the disciple James, was thrust through by the sword. The other disciples are reported in extra biblical accounts. Peter was crucified upside down. Another, Bartholomew, was flayed alive, where they pin you down to the ground and they peel the skin off you like you're a fish. Another was boiled in oil. We have the writings of Tacitus, who was a historian. He was also a Roman senator. He was a historian. He gives the account. He's the one who told us that Nero was the one who set Rome on fire. It's that historian. He reports how the Christians were being put to death. He said we would tie fresh animal skins to them and throw them to wild dogs. And they weren't denying their confessions. Pliny the Younger was in Asia Minor. He was a governor in Asia Minor. And he reports how he's putting many of the Christians in the province to death as he's writing to Trajan, the emperor of Rome. Extra biblical documents. Trajan writes a letter back to him. He says, keep putting them to death if they won't deny this confession. These people were going to their death. Many people die for what they believe. Happens all the time. But there's nobody dies for what they know to be a lie. Nobody dies for that. These men and these women were going to their death for something they had seen with their own eyes. They knew it to be true. Nobody dies for what they know to be a lie. They would be boiling the oil for this disciple, and there's no way he's going to allow himself to be boiled if this were not true. He'd be like, psych, let me tell you where we laid the body. You know, in Watergate, the FBI came to the henchmen of President Nixon, Chuck Colson being one of them, and they said, look, if you guys don't tell us what you did, we're going to put all of you in jail. But the first person to come to us, we're going to go easy on them. There was a mass run to get to the FBI because only the first person was going to be given leniency. And he reported on all the others, and many of them went to jail. That story broke down in less than 1 week, and just with the threat of jail. Here these people had the threat of death, and the story wouldn't break down. Every week I tell this story to somebody, just like I've told you, about the resurrection. And every week I see this. I see people go from not believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ to believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ based on this 1-hour discussion. Every week. For years I've seen this, hundreds and hundreds of times. I've seen this. My question to you is, how do you think they went from not believing in the resurrection to believing in the resurrection based on a 1-hour conversation? How do you think that happens? It's an interesting thought. Almost all of these are educated people. Many of them are Chinese. They're not coming from Christian backgrounds. I do it with people all over the world, and many of them from Muslim backgrounds. How do I see this all the time? And I'll tell you, after seeing hundreds of these conversions, what I think happens. I don't think it's because of, a great proof here that I put before them. I think it's because of the truth of the resurrection was already written on their heart. God had put it there. This is such an amazing event, and he makes it as a requirement in order to be saved. So he's already written that truth on the heart, that Jesus has risen from the dead. I'm going to pray a prayer right around this Romans 10:9, and I want you to pray with me. But I want to first tell you one very short story from the Gospel according to Mark chapter 9. A man brings his son to Jesus for healing, to Jesus' disciples for healing. The disciples are unable to heal him. They see Jesus coming off the mountain. He grabs his son, he runs to Jesus, and he says, "Lord, heal my son if you can." And Jesus says to him, "If you can, all things are possible to him who believes." And the man said something quite profound. He said, "Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief." The man was being honest. He said, "I believe you could heal him, but I'm not 100% there." And Jesus didn't say, "Well, you come back when you're 100% and I'll heal your son." Jesus immediately healed his son. I don't know how much faith he had. The disciples were unable to heal his son, so you can see why he had some doubt. Maybe his faith was only 50%, maybe 25%. Whatever it was, Jesus immediately healed his son. You may not have 100% belief in the resurrection. We can't have 100% belief in anything in this life. For all I know, we are living in a matrix. You don't exist, I don't exist. We're just electrons and some transistors, and some aliens are laughing at us. All right? We don't know. Now, the probability of that in my mind is fairly small, but it's non-zero. So I don't have 100%. We don't have 100% of anything in this life. And so what I want to do is I want to pray a prayer right around this. And I want you to pray with me, because I don't think that you will ever have an appeal like this ever again in your lives. An appeal like this. Based upon whatever faith you have, pray with me. I'm going to pray, and you just repeat after me. In your heart, you repeat after me. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Lord, I believe that Jesus is Lord, and I believe he has risen from the dead. Thank you for dying for me, because I am a sinner. Thank you for giving your life for me. Fill me with your Holy Spirit and let me live for you. In the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, I'm going to close there and open this up. I'm going to open this up now for questions. And if you prayed that prayer, send me an email to tour@drjamestour.org. Send me an email, and because I'd like to speak with you. And if you were unable to pray that prayer and you need a little bit more discussion, send me an email. This is not for people who already believed it. This is for people that didn't believe it or don't believe it, or people that have just come to believe it. You act upon the faith, the measure of faith that God has given you. I open it up to you for questions. So there's a microphone. So just put up your hand and you'll get a microphone and ask the question. There's a question up here.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was really great just to see you for the first time. I watched your YouTube videos, and so it was pretty cool. I was just wondering, like, what you thought about the Shroud of Turin. Do you believe that it's the actual, like, thing, the covering that was around Christ? I think there was a study about the half-life of the Shroud of Turin, and was saying it was from the Second Temple times, and I was just wondering what you think.
Yeah, I don't know the Shroud of Turin. Many people have come to say that this was probably the Shroud. It has a lot of things pointing to it. And one guy, a friend of mine, he said, Jim, you gotta do a YouTube video on this. I mean, you just got to. I mean, I've looked over all the evidence. It looks really good. And then just this week, I got an email from him saying, oh, there's a video that just came out on the internet saying, giving all this evidence for why it is not the shroud of Jesus. And he says, I'm not as sure anymore. So I just don't know. I mean, that's not my area of expertise. So I just don't know. And no matter what it does, no matter whether it is or it isn't, it doesn't affect me. So I just don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. And I've looked at a few of the videos on it, and I've seen it, and there's some people I really respect, think it's indeed real, but I just don't know. Yeah, he holds on to the microphone. That was my request, because what I've seen is if you give away the mic, sometimes people go into a huge diatribe and you can't get it away from them. So I asked for a strong individual to hold the microphone.
Hey, Dr. Tor, how you doing?
How you doing? Here's my friend from New Jersey.
Yeah.
I'm from Manhattan, New York.
I know.
Myself.
Yeah.
We got.
At first, thank you for the talk, and for what you do. And I just had a question about more so Mr. Durant that you brought up.
Yeah.
You know, you can see that even he acknowledges the evidence.
Yes.
Right, but he is a self-proclaimed agnostic.
Yes.
Right. So I guess my question to you would be, I got a lot, but one of them would be, what is the argument for people that are like him, that the evidence is in front of their face, right? Mm-hmm. So they see that the grand creation and scheme of there being a designer, a creator, but they don't want to acknowledge that as being a personal savior and like Jesus being that actual God.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And he's not the only one. There's many scholars that read this document for years and years. And what I've seen is if you read this just as an intellectual text, you go into it in that way, as it's intellectual only, sometimes you don't get it. And as you go in there being a seeker, Jesus said, he who seeks will find. As you go in there being a seeker rather than a critiquer, you often receive. You come with an act of humility. And what I have seen, and for you guys, most of you are not historians. If you are not a believer, if you read the New Testament twice, you will become a believer. And how can I say that? Because if you don't have to read this as an academic thing, if you read this and you go into this and say, Lord, if this is real, show me. That's all you got to say. Lord, if this is real, show me. You read the New Testament twice, you will come out a believer. I've seen it over and over again. Happened with my mother at the age of 72. I come from a Jewish home. Happened with my mother when she was 72. And she was on her second time through reading the New Testament. It happened with a colleague of mine who was an economist at the university. He went back he was Korean. He went back to Korea. He helped them through their financial crisis, and he ran for Korean parliament, and he won by like 75% of the vote. I mean, which is very high. And I had told him before he left the university, he told me he was reading the New Testament. I said, you'll become a believer. And he looked at me with these, he thought I was crazy. And he came back one day, and he came to the university, visited me. He says, just want you to know, I believe Jesus was indeed the Lord. So you read the New Testament twice, you're going to come out a believer.
Hi. Well, first, thanks for your talk. My question is concerning, you mentioned maybe 500, 1,000 years from now, science would be able to explain the origin of it. Maybe.
Yeah.
And conceivably, you could extend that argument to other unsolved areas in science. And given enough time, perhaps we will have a satisfactory explanation for most unsolved questions that we have. And my question then is, how would you reconcile something like that with your faith, and where is that boundary?
No problem. So if we find out how life originated scientifically, I don't think anybody would be happier than me. Because, prior to 1953, we didn't understand anything about information in a cell. And now we understand information in a cell. We have a very good handle on it. And it gives me a much deeper appreciation for how God did this. Like, oh, that's how you did it. This is utterly amazing. Amazing. So I look, for example, at leaves on a tree all the time. Lots of people do. But in my mind's eye, I start seeing magnesium atoms sitting in the middle of a porphyrin, which are 4 nitrogen heterocycles, 4 nitrogen rings, all hooked together. And photons of light are hitting that magnesium atom. And then it's ejecting electron hundreds of angstroms to start the photosynthesis process, which is converting carbon dioxide to carbon and oxygen, which is a very hard reaction to do. The man and the woman on the street don't see what I see. I see that. Chemists can see that. And it gives me a much deeper appreciation for God. That doesn't make God less in my eyes. That makes him all the more. There's a reason why we build our robots out of silicon and plastic and wires. And we make them to look like people, but we use those things because we don't know how to build with molecules. It is so hard. This is like the hardest way you could do construction is to build out of these 4 classes of compounds. And that's what we see as the ubiquitous life around us. You turn over a rock and you got gazillion organisms under there that you can see with your eyes. And then you look with a microscope and there's another 10 zillion of them. And so life is ubiquitous, made out of these molecules. We don't know how to construct like that. You would think that we would mimic exactly what's all around us when we build our robots. But we don't know how to. We just don't know how to. And so you take the hardest way you could think of constructing something, and that's the way we're built. And then to understand that someday, I'd be like, oh, God, that's how you did it. That's amazing. You are just amazing. Over and over again, you amaze me. So I'd be really happy. It wouldn't shake my faith a bit. It would strengthen it. Okay.
Oh, hi, Dr. Tor. Thank you for such an engaging presentation. My question for you is, from a scientific perspective, what do you think is the most compelling counter-argument to the existence of God, and how would you respond to it?
Wow. I think you have to go fishing to find a counter-argument from God, of God in nature. I mean, when you just look at our physical constants, they didn't have to be this way. All of life revolves around the physical constants being extremely precise to within, hundredths of a percent, or else life doesn't exist. Mathematics, the whole field of mathematics, how does mathematics describe all of these things? It doesn't have to, but it did. And this confluence of things for this planet that we live on, there's no other planet that you could stand on and you can look up, that has an atmosphere that you can look up and behold the heavens. It's just here. Most of the time when there's an atmosphere, you can't see through anything. And that we can look up and behold the heavens at night. I mean, everything, it is so set up for life here. I don't know what the counter-argument is. That's like asking me, what's the counter-argument for life? I mean, I see it in front of my eyes. I mean, I don't have a counter-argument for God. Because everything I see the hand of God. I don't know how how atoms hold together the way they do, how molecules share electrons between the atoms that holds the molecular structures together. This is so amazing. Just like even gravity, still to this day, we can define gravity by saying this inverse square law, distance, but we really don't know what is gravity. This is why when Newton came up with this force between the Earth and the Moon, what is this force? He didn't know what the force was, but he says it's gravity, but he couldn't explain it. They thought he was speaking demonically. They said, you're speaking demon-type things. We still, to this day, don't know what gravity is. We can define it mathematically, but we don't know what it is. What is holding these two things together? And then you think of dark matter. 70 to 90% of all matter and energy is dark matter and dark energy, meaning that we know it exists because of difference, but we can't see it, we can't detect it. Now, many things we couldn't detect for many years. Now we can see in the infrared because we have infrared detectors. We can see in the UV, we have UV detectors. We can see in the X-ray, we can see in the gamma ray, we can see in the microwave. Radio waves are hitting us all the time. I don't feel any radio waves, do you? But you put a little radio here that has an antenna, and you know the radio waves, excuse me, are all here. They're all here. But now we can detect them. So we haven't been able to figure out how to detect this dark matter, but it's all around us. So everywhere I look, it's like, this is an amazing place. This is a giant laboratory. And I'm like a kid in a candy store, so I don't have a good answer for you. It's the next question.
Hi, thank you so sorry, I was going to grab the mic. Thank you so much. My question is, if you could speak a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's a lot of people that, and like specifically, like how strong of a piece of evidence is it actually, especially with regards to some people say, the Bible's been translated and changed so many times. Yeah. Like how significant is the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Right. So people make these sort of silly claims that it's been changed and everything. If you looked at my organic chemistry textbook that I teach out of, 1,200 pages, and if somebody walked up and flipped through that for 15 minutes and say, it's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, it's full of contradictions, it doesn't make sense, I would think that person is an absolute idiot. Because you can't spend 15 minutes looking at that text, my organic chemistry textbook, and to speak like that. But people will do that with the Bible. They say that about the Bible, and they just show themselves to be absolute idiots by saying this. So there were these claims that the Bible has been changed, has been altered, that portions have been inserted into the book of Isaiah, for example, that prophesy so directly about the resurrection of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus. Isaiah 52, verse 13 through 15, and all of Isaiah 53. They say that was a later insertion. And then we find the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are found in the 1940s. You find the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1940s and into the 1950s. And those were different pieces, and you find every book of the Old Testament, and the Dead Sea Scrolls date to 150 BC and before. So before Jesus was ever born on this earth, we have documents, and their Bible, and every book of the Old Testament, the Tanakh, is there except for the book of Esther. And the entire Isaiah scroll, the entire book of Isaiah as one unit is there, and there's more portions of Isaiah 53 than any other portion. It's exactly the text that we have today, because before that, the oldest text that we have was one from about 1000 AD. And this goes back before the time of Jesus, and it's the same thing. And so this just nails it. And all these cries that, that was a later insertion by Christians into the book of Isaiah, couldn't have been. So it's just absolutely compelling. And when people make petty arguments about things, is like the person that would walk up and criticize an organic chemistry textbook after looking at it for 15 minutes, because nobody who has really studied this will throw this at the doorstep of coincidence and nonsense, because it's so firm. So thank you for asking that question. Can I just, how? Stand up. Give that microphone, well, hold that microphone for Hal. Tell me, how did I do on the organic chemistry?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Now listen. When Chinese people say pretty good, that means really good. It does. They put pretty in front of good all the time because they think that that's the way you use the two terms together. But pretty good in their mind means that's solid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have no complaints about my claims on organic chemistry?
Not at all.
Do you have any idea where life came from?
I don't know.
Okay. There you go. All right. Thank you, Hal.
Thank you.
There's more questions right around you. Right next, right behind you.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have a question regarding the sort of latter portion about the New Testament that you walked us through. So I guess I think I'm on board with you, at least. Like most people perhaps are reluctant to accept a supernatural explanation, at least for science. And I think you described all the problems that we don't know. But I guess I'm wondering about how people of other faiths who are willing to accept supernatural explanations. So, for example, someone of Islam or other faiths, Hinduism, Shintoism, what would your response to them be if they were to say, for example, some of the things you had mentioned, read the Quran twice with an open mind, or some of those similar things. What would your response? Why Judeo-Christianity?
Okay, so why Christianity basically is your question, and yeah.
Yeah, how do you justify? At least, I would be interested in knowing your response. How do you justify accepting the supernatural explanation that Christianity puts forward, while denying other supernatural explanations that other faiths put forward?
Sure. Okay, so like I said, I come from a Jewish home, and it was a secular Jewish home, so I was never a very good Jew. In fact, I'm a much better Jew than I was when I called myself just a Jew. I mean, I still call myself a Jew. It's I believe Jesus is the Messiah. And somebody gave me a presentation of the gospel when I was 18 years old, right after I went to college. And I read this verse with him, and it says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And I said to him, "I'm not a sinner." I didn't view myself as a sinner. Modern secular Judaism, we don't think about little things as being sin. I said, "I never killed anybody. I never robbed a bank. How could I be a sinner?" And then he turned to Matthew 5:28. Jesus said, "I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." I was addicted to pornography from the age of 14. I was working in a gas station on the highway just outside of New York City. And my job at the age of 14 was to clean the restrooms, clean the parking lots. And I would find these magazines, and I became addicted at a very young age. And I never told anybody. Back in those days, we didn't talk about our struggles and our addictions. Now people say, I'm going to see my therapist today. Nobody would have ever said that back then. Nobody. And I read that verse, and it blasted my heart. And it's hard to explain, but when Jesus is speaking to you, his words have this enormous power. I didn't know how to look at a woman without lust. That's all I knew. Number two, how could I commit adultery in my heart? I was enough of a Jew to know that adultery was wrong, but how can I do it in my heart? Adultery for me was a physical thing. How can I do it in my heart? But Jesus is always getting at our heart. And then he took me through the gospel to talk about how there's nothing that I can do of this in myself, how Jesus gave himself for me. Jesus gives himself for me. And you look at this picture, the Bible says that no man can see God and live, which makes sense. When you look at the James Webb telescope and you see all of these colorful spots, those are all galaxies, and you go, my goodness, this is amazing. And then the God who made all of this, it's natural, we can't approach him. But he says, I want to have a relationship with people. I will become one of them. You know, right near my home is the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And a lot of people come in for cancer treatments, the biggest cancer center in the world. There are 5 hospitals, 185,000 employees, big place. And so people come in sometimes for months at a time for treatment. They can't afford a hotel, so they stay. Our church has a ministry. Sometimes they stay in our homes. Child getting chemotherapy, they lose their hair. Sometimes you see the mother or the father or both will shave their head in solidarity with that child, and it changes the child. They're like, okay, we're in this together. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 2, Jesus took on flesh and blood because his children are of flesh and blood. In solidarity with us, God takes on flesh and blood. It's an amazing picture that he does. Takes on flesh and blood. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, information was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, John chapter 1, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God becomes flesh and dwells among us. And we beheld his glory. Glory is the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. God becomes flesh. I was in my room all alone on November 7th, 1977. This guy had shared with me in August. I fell on my knees. I don't know why. Most Jews stand when we pray. Most Christians I had seen sit when they pray. And I said, Lord, forgive me because I'm a sinner. And all of a sudden, I felt the peace of God fill this room. And just to my right, 3 feet away, Jesus is standing. And it's not an optical thing or an auditory thing. His presence was so real. I don't know how I even knew it was Jesus, but I knew it was him. I was on my knees. I turned. I put my face to the ground, and I just started weeping. I had never felt such love poured out on me. I don't even know how long he was there. It wasn't a flash. He just stayed there pouring out liquid love on me. I got up. After a while, I wiped my tears. I was never the same. I didn't tell anybody because here's this Jewish kid. I don't know what to say. And I couldn't stop thinking about Jesus. I was dreaming about Jesus at night in my dreams. I was dreaming about telling people about Jesus in my dreams. This is a Jewish kid telling people about Jesus in his dreams. I didn't know that that dream was prophetic, that that's what my life was going to be spent doing. That's what Jesus did. He gave me a prophecy of what my life was going to be. 2 weeks later, the guy who had shared with me back in August saw me, and he says, Jim, have you received Jesus in your heart? And I said, I think I have. I don't know. I think I have. Why do you ask? He says, you haven't stopped smiling for weeks. You're different. Something's happened to you. And I said, how can I keep this? I've never felt this close to God like this. He said, if you read your Bible every day, you'll stay close to God. If you don't, you won't. For 47 years, I've read the scriptures every day, for 47 years. That was an experience, but that's not what I bank on. The scriptures talk about this, but it's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is the fundamental of our faith, the resurrection. Now, when you start looking into the veracity of the Bible versus other documents, it blows away everything. Like I was talking about, the higher criticism now is being applied to other religions. It is dicing it up totally destroying it. You dig where these other things say there's nothing. There's nothing there. It's falling apart. Even huge sites that should be there for the miraculous event, there's nothing there. There's nothing. People weren't even living there. There's no trace of humans even being there. It's slicing it up. There's so much evidence around the scriptures that it's very hard to try to dismiss this, according to what the Bible says. But I don't want to give the impression that I have studied all religions in depth. I know what Jesus did for me. I know what happened to me on that day, November 7th, 1977, the change that came over me. It changed the whole focus of my life. And now I share with people from all over the world. I don't know if you've ever watched any of my YouTube videos, but I have like 30 seconds, I don't advertise items. I advertise myself. I say, if you don't believe in the physical resurrection, I'll do a Zoom call with you. I speak to Muslim women in their kitchens with headphones on so their family can't hear in deep Muslim countries, and I see conversion after conversion. And the life that I see changed, I see changed people over and over and over again. Were dramatic changes over lives. I'm telling you, I don't go a week without leading somebody to the Lord. Many weeks, it's multiple people, all one-on-one. All of my action is one-on-one. And I get them all involved in Bible study, all in daily reading, and I see the change. So for me, it is so profound. And from all different backgrounds, all over the world. And so that's who I am. I can't say I'm a scholar in any faith. I'm not even a scholar in Christianity. I'm not. I'm just a Jewish kid who reads the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. I'm done, I start again. Everything I do, I'm a layman, but I love Jesus. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's the best I can do.
Hi, thank you so much for having this talk. I really appreciate it. And me as a believer in believing that God is the King of all kings and the Most High, I have a question on in what ways, or I guess my question is, what is your take on the common enemy and in what ways does he work in science today?
All right, so do I believe there's evil in the world and there's someone named Satan? Yes, because I believe the Bible. You don't have to believe in Satan in order to get saved. The Bible is very specific. It's right here. It's that you have to confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, but what do you have to believe? That he's risen from the dead. You don't have to believe in the virgin birth. You don't have to believe in the crossing of the Red Sea. You don't have to believe in Adam and Eve. You don't have to believe in the Noah Ark story. Now, you may have good reason to believe that, but this is all you need in order to be saved. That's the part that God's written on your heart. As far as Satan, I remember when I was a young Christian, a young believer, I saw two of my roommates, because I moved into this home with nine other Christian guys. And they were having this discussion about demons. And I said, you guys believe in demons? And they said, you don't? The Bible talks a lot about this. And then it occurred to me, yeah, it's written about in the Bible all the time. And so you go to certain parts of the world, there's no doubt that people believe in demons. I mean, they've seen it. They've seen the evil. They see what it does to lives. And since then, I did prison ministry for many years. I see what demonic forces do to lives. And people who would walk up to me and say, I worship Satan. And I'm like, why would you want to worship Satan? I mean, worship a rock. I mean, this is the worst thing that you can worship. And you see what it does to their lives. Yeah, and what his influence is in science. I mean, scientists very often think they're know-it-alls. I mean, they think they know the origin of life, and as soon as I peg them down, they sheepishly slink away, because somehow they feel that they need to know this, the need to know. And I said, we just don't know. So scientists are like everybody else. We have fears that we have to allay, and we make ourselves as knowing more than we really know, just like everybody else. Because we have these insecurity problems and these low self-esteem problems just like everybody else. And I'm the number one prime example of this. And I'm the prime example of what Paul said. God takes the foolish things of the world, the base things of the world, the despised, the things that are not, that he might nullify the things that are. That's who I am. And I see the work of Satan all the time in this. But you don't have to believe that to get saved.
Thank you so much for the talk. I just wanted to ask you, like, as a scientist, what's your stance on like the theory of evolution, and also as a Christian? Many Christians believe like the Earth is 6,000 years old, but like with carbon dating and like with all of that, like I just wanted to know your perspective as a scientist.
Well, I could be sympathetic to why they would believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, because they're tracking the lifetimes of people back. And if the creation happened in 6 24-hour days, then they track that back and they say that the good approximation is the lifetimes of people. So I can see how they can get that. We know our universe is expanding. All right, the Bible doesn't say it's not. We know it's expanding because we can see the red shifts, and so it's expanding from origin point. A day at the beginning of the expansion versus a day now is very different because we're expanding out. So the time frame of a day is very different. So in other words, if we look back in time, we can look back in time, track that back in the expansion of the universe, you can see that what looked like a very short time period to them looks like a very long time period to us, because there's something called the theory of relativity. Where you are in the expansion of the universe affects how you view time, right? And and then if you look between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 3, there seems to have been a gap. And that gap doesn't define for us any amount of time that there could have been that gap. And so there's an open question as to how long that gap is. But if you were to go to 6 24-hour days in our reckoning of 24 hours, I can see how they can get that. But as far as the age of the universe, you don't have to get that and still be consistent with the Bible, because there is a gap at Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. There's a gap there, all right? And we also know that we have an expanding universe, and that's why tomorrow will be a slightly longer day than it is today, because we will have expanded out in our universe. As far as the theory of evolution, it is a theory. We certainly see microevolution, small changes. We see it all the time in my own lab. We work a lot with bacteria, and you see small perturbations in DNA, and you have epigenetics, where there's external things that causes changes in us. Every time we get a new virus, it can change our DNA, and that gets passed on to our children. So we see small changes. In my lab, every time we had a virus cell, it remains. Every time we had a bacterial cell, it remains as a bacterium. Every time we had a mouse, it remained as a mouse. I think there's a big extrapolation to having gross changes in organisms. Body plan changes are much harder for me to understand the chemical changes that come about. So what I do is I ask my biochemist friends, explain to me how you get massive body plan changes through the theory of evolution. And they will say one small change at a time. I say, okay, now let's get rid of the just so stories and explain to me the chemistry on how that can begin to take place. And none of them will answer me. And remember, no answer is an answer in itself. Just about 2 weeks ago on my YouTube channel, I interviewed a guy named Rob Statler, and he's a biomedical engineer, graduated from both MIT and Harvard. He talks about the tree of life. The tree of life is, remember, this Darwinian tree of life. You come from a single cell and you get simple organisms, and then it goes higher up. You get all these branches, and you get the diversity of life that you have today. That's the tree of life. He talks about the shrubbery of life. If you just look at the top part, cut away all the bottom, the top part is exactly what the book of Genesis lays out. You get kinds coming up. And he talks about the credibility of the science that goes on when you're talking about a macroevolution that's taking place. So watch that video by someone who knows a lot more about this than I do, and it'll give you a different perspective. The other thing is this: many things we have in science we interpret differently over time. Science changes every decade. There's big changes. In the 1950s, most scientists believed that the universe has always been steady state approximation. They thought the Bible was nonsense, saying that the universe had a beginning. And then with the recording of microwave background radiation in 1964, there was a switch. Prior to that, most scientists in the 1940s, 1950s believed that the universe has always been. After 1964, most scientists, yes, the universe had a beginning. It had a beginning. And so science dramatically changed at that time. Changes all the time. In 1972, Gould comes out, and he says the fossil record does not support gradual changes over time like what Darwin spoke about. And Gould was not a Christian man. And he says what the fossil record supports is a massive change over short periods of time, and then it's just steady. And massive change over short periods of time, and then it's steady. That's what the fossil record shows. So 1972, it changed. 1980, it changed. Alvarez hypothesis comes in. We no longer think that dinosaurs died because of climate change. They died because a meteorite hit the Yucatan Peninsula and spread dirt into the air. And that killed off the plants. And then the herbivores died, so the carnivores died. That's what wiped out the dinosaurs. Science changed in 1980. Junk DNA, that what I grew up on, that were 98% the same as a chimpanzee. And all that other DNA that's just junk DNA. That's no longer called junk DNA. That is now called intergenic DNA. It may not be protein coding, but what it is regulatory. It is the traffic cops that turn on, what goes off. And there we are massively different than the chimpanzee. And so if you look at 2% of the DNA, we look 98% the same as a chimpanzee. But if you look at the massive amounts of DNA, we're very different. And so science changes. What I'm saying is the interpretation of science changes all the time, and it's put forth as fact, and science changes all the time, certainly on the order of decades. Along with that, Bible interpretation changes for all individuals. When I read the Bible today, I view it differently than I did 30 years ago when I read the same passage. Because I've read more, I've considered different things and consider the way other people have viewed things. And so sometimes we interpret the Bible wrongly. Sometimes we interpret science wrongly. So things are changing all the time. So in my mind, it's there. Nothing bothers me. Nothing bothers me.
First of all, thank you so much. So I study physics, so a lot of the things you mentioned about cosmic constants and about science actually strengthening the faith really relates to me. So thank you for mentioning that. I actually have two questions, but I'll say the one just to save for time. When I'm talking to a lot of my atheist friends, I'll present, this scientific argument, this a logical argument, by Thomas Aquinas or something. And sometimes what they will say is, okay, I see your argument, but I'm just not physically ready to accept that there is a God and that He's our creator and the Bible, etc., etc. What is one thing that you would try to let them do or try to tell them to kind of accelerate that process? Because I have talked to a lot of people and that's their response, kind of like the ultimate rejection, I guess.
Well, I mean, one of the things that works really well is their life starts to collapse. Their lives start to fall apart after a while. A lot of times in college, people think they've got the world by the tail. And then their decisions start catching up with them. They marry certain people and they thought, well, if I love somebody, my marriage will be just fine. And then they have children and the children aren't just fine. And the children don't measure up to what they had hoped. And then sickness comes on, accidents comes on. And the things of life often get a hold of people. So I would encourage you to continue to share, because what happens is people go through things and they sometimes then become more open. They become more open and their lives open up. And that's the kind of people that contact me. And that's why I would say my success rate in seeing people come to the Lord is like 90%, because they've been so beat up by the world and they're asking me. And so what I would encourage you to do is watch for the people that are showing signs of interest. And then if they ask you about your faith, this is now a heart that's open, and what's written on their heart about the resurrection is ready to come bursting forth. You have to respond very quickly with those people. They're showing an interest. You're a Christian. What does that mean? You got to go after that. That's fruit ready to be picked right there. As soon as they start showing a sign, they're open to coming with you to a Christian meeting. That's an open sign. The other ones, they have to hear lots of messages, and often it's when they're going through a divorce, when they're going through the loss of a child. I mean, something that's devastating, and they're like, I don't really have the world by the tail. In fact, I'm getting beat up really bad by this thing. I don't really have it together. and then they're more open. Okay. Last question.
Thank you for coming. I believe that you're using fine-tuning argument for like proving the existence of God, but if you use the cosmological argument for existence of God, I'm just making it short. It divides by like things by into two groups. One is necessary being, the other is contingent being. Contingent being, they're the one that began to exist and need a cause for their existence, and necessary being, they existed forever and they will be there forever, and they don't need a cause. They're not dependent on anyone. But if I have a hard time applying the same to Christianity, which is like the idea of Trinity, 3 and 1, one would say like it's not like all of them is one part of the same thing. But just the fact that you call it 3 doesn't make it divisible like 3 parts. Like how would like one would like integrate that in their beliefs?
So I don't. You know, the term Trinity is not a biblical term. That's a term that people used. And you will find in all religions, people use terms that are not in their holy book just to help to distill down a definition. Do you think that God exists here in Vermont?
Yes.
Do you think that God exists in Texas, where I'm from?
Everywhere.
So God is able to be in more than one place at one time?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm good with that. All right. And so God can be in more than one place. Could he speak to your heart here in Vermont? Could God speak to your heart?
Yes.
Could he at the same time speak to my heart when I'm in Texas? At the same time?
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, but like it's not the same thing with human being. That's the difference.
No. It's not that. No. So, but you will agree, God can be speaking to you and speaking to me in two totally different places.
Yeah, but like if you think of like.
So you're embracing a supernatural that God can do this. You know, you're trying to key in on something that you know is a common argument, and it really does nothing. You know, God wanted so much to have a relationship with us. The Bible says he took on flesh and blood because we are flesh and blood. This is an amazing story, an amazing fellowship with God. And what we have is a closeness of relationship where God took on what we have. God restricted himself in that way, but he still at the exact same time, he was still in heaven. He still never left heaven. He was still there. He was still operating there. And his flesh died here on earth. That flesh died here on earth. But he was still very much alive in heaven. That didn't kill God in that sense. It killed God in the human sense that he was here on earth. So, you know, and I'd like to leave it at that, all right? You know, I've had lots of discussions with very dear friends of mine that come from the same persuasion that you do. And, but I'd like to leave it at that, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And now a round of applause for Dr. James Torr.